In 2 days, we did the classic Landistry Mamas 2 right now in we did the two West Village locations. Then we went over to Scars and had cellos after that. So that was all one afternoon.
But we also had Joe's in there.
Yeah, okay. I was going to ask about Joe's, and it was you have to have been part of that. Joe's never seems to fall off the map as being a destination point.
Yeah, yeah. So that was truly all within a couple hours, which was a lot. It is work, actually.
Oh, exactly. You got to pace yourself on something like that.
Well, it's like you get to the first place, you like eat the full slice. Second place, you eat the full slice. After a while, you're like, "Ooh, how many more slices am I eating?"
Yeah, one little bite. Yeah, right, right.
So we did all of that. Then we had dinner that night at Lucia, the Alimentari, which was an interesting version to see because they're doing a little bit of more of the concept of like a smaller New York style, it more individual personal size 12-inch New York style as well.
Yeah.
And then the next day we went to Chrissy's and Feeney and potentially one more. And then we had dinner at Rott's in Jersey City, which is always epic.
Russia. Yeah, yeah. With Dan.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and in terms of I think what was really interesting for me to see, and in terms of trying to develop a dough that would work for this, was the different tastes and preferences that people liked and wanted. Because you've got even on that spectrum, you've got Joe's, which is much more the old school, pretty traditional, definitely like multiple different, like straight yeasted, sweeter dough, sweeter sauce, not necessarily getting as hard of a bake on it. Like there's a lot of different qualities that kind of fit a little bit more of that maybe up until 5-10 years ago New York style slice,
Right.
which and the owners who grew up more with that, and like Sal and Carmine's was kind of their like personal nostalgic reference point, I think have like a certain amount of interest in that type of a slice. But then you go to Lindustry, which is obviously kind of the darling, like it's incredible, but that's sort of the slice that I feel like everyone wants to shoot for nowadays.
Is the industry in Man? I thought it was in Brooklyn. Is it in Manhattan?
There's two. Yeah. So they opened a West Village location, I want to say maybe a year ago, maybe less. And
Yeah, I think it was just about a year ago.
They sure have been getting a lot of positive press, and so
they deserve it. It's great. It's really, really good. But it's definitely a different style. And so it's funny. It was sort of funny to contrast those two, and useful to sort of be like, okay, you like these components of this dough, but you also like that this one does have, a biga, and so and a little bit of longer fermentation on the pre-ferment side at least. And there's it's a bit lighter, it's baked like this bit of, definitely a bolder bake on this, like the crust, it has some actual like Maillard reaction, so just like
yeah.
trying to see what they liked so that I could kind of get a sense of what to work towards, was a really useful way of doing it, even though it was a lot of pizza in a short amount of time.
So and in the end, you have to come up with something that both of you guys love. It can't whether it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that from everybody, but it's got to be in the end, it's got to be your pizza. So how would you then describe what the result was? Is
Yeah.
the merger or the convergence of all of these inputs.
Right. I mean, to me, at least what I was going for with the formula for the dough itself is still really rooted flavor wise. So we stuck with a straight yeasted dough, not even with, I played with a version with Polish and a version with
Yeah.
Biga. I didn't go with sourdough at any point really for it, mostly because that's not that you can obviously have a sourdough pizza that's not very sour, but that just wasn't really the flavor or the texture that they had talked about liking. And then on top of that, I think I felt a little uncomfortable as someone who was working on this in more of like a consulting capacity with passing off a project like sourdough, which just is so complicated at times, and
Yeah.
there's just a lot more to be noticing and paying attention for and knowing how to troubleshoot on a daily basis.
Yeah, and if you see what Dan Richards doing at Raza, he's almost got like a laboratory there, and he micromanages every degree of temperature, and that would be a lot to manage.
You pretty much need that to ensure the consistency.
Yeah.
So I didn't. It felt easier as like more managed, not necessarily easier, but more executable, basically, to pass along a recipe that was straight yeasted or would have had the polish. But we ended up in a few different head-to-head tastings. I actually sort of liked, for what we were going for, the straight yeasted dough better. And what it really, I think the way I would describe it is that it has a lot of those principles of like straight yeasted, long fermentation, though not like not incredibly long, like the way that some New York style spice places will do, like 72 hours in the fridge. Not quite that long, but still like a longer, slower fermentation. On the slightly sweeter end, there's a little bit of sugar in the dough, not much, but just a touch to get it slightly more active, but also to add a little bit of that like yeasty, malty
Yeah.
sweetness
Yeah.
that you get in New York style. But the biggest difference to me is really the quality of flours, where a lot of New York style pizzerias that might still use like an all trumps, let's say.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, that's the big issue these days is the flour, of course.
Yeah, yeah. So we're using a combination of one of the flours from Central Milling and then one of the flours from Cairn Spring Mills, which I want
Yeah.
a lot at Tartine, and I love their flours, and especially it's that and they're both nice flowers. The Central Milling's great, but that Cairn Spring, we're using Sequoia there. Which is the
Yeah.
variety.
I'm familiar with Cairn Spring. I just recently did a class that they sponsored, so I had to
Yeah.
really come up to speed on their flour, and
Yeah.
it performs very differently from a lot of the other mills because they don't put any malt or any enzymes in there. It's just pure flour.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's correct, but that's very flavor.
Because they're able to mill it, they do that dual, so they both roller mill and stone mill,
Yeah.
but they're able to keep the temperature a lot lower on their roller mill, so you're not having damaged starches, but at the same time, you are getting a finer flour, so they're able to keep a much higher ash content in a lot of them. So the Sequoia we're using is a Type 85, which, for pizza is, like, pretty unusual.
Yeah.
There's, like, 40% Type 85 flour in this pizza dough, that's, like, not very typical, I would say, for.
In a way, it's kind of French. It's kind of very, very poilon,
Totally, yeah, yeah, definitely. But it brings a lot of that maltiness that you're talking about in a way, because it still has more of the bran and the germ without sort of having to add that in through, by basically adding,
If
addition.
If I recall correctly, I think the Sequoia, they call it an all-purpose flour, don't they? Not a bread flour.
Yeah.
So it gives a lower protein.
The Sequoia and their Edison are both like that, and they're both around 11 to 12% protein, because a lot of their other flours, which are great, but I mean, and really good for bread, like their Trailblazer or their Glacier Peak, those are like 13.5%.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
very, very strong.
And that would be a little bit more elastic for your guys to stretch.
And it's a little bit tougher, I find, when you're eating. Like, for me, a really good classic New York style slice is strong enough to stretch and to pick up the piece and not fall over. But when you eat it, you don't want to have this like tough resistance and chewy. You're eating this whole slice. If your jaw's like tired by the end, that's fine.
You're not eating a bagel.
Right? Yeah. Exactly.
So that must have been fun for you guys to kind of like fine tune all of that. You must have been were you working on that back in San Francisco and then kind of sending them, try this, try that?
Yeah, yeah, and then I came back and we did a big. I was there for about a week in November, and we tried everything together, like kind of did a like A/B testing of a lot of different of the doughs and then of the sauces and cheeses, like Ian was saying. And then I came back again for the opening, so it was a little bit of back and forth around it, but yeah, very fun process, honestly.
Hey, fellow Pizza Questers, if you like this clip, click over here for the full video. And don't forget to subscribe for more Pizza Quest episodes.